So the latest and final season of Game of Thrones is here, and is wrapping up after 9 years. Ugh. There are still no new books yet, but whether or not you feel satisfied at the conclusion of this epic storyline...
And are you happy with how things ended?
Yeah. Best season ever!
Either way, when it's over, it's over. So now is the time to have a look at what else you could watch to fill in the gap left behind. And if I may be so bold, may I suggest some anime? Because for many years, I have been the subject of countless questions of what anime should someone watch with little context. Just recommend me some anime, they say. And I'll list off a few, and then they'll respond with something like, oh, but I've already seen those. Which makes the conversation frustrating. So the ways that I like to recommend anime is to ask back, well, what shows or movies outside of anime do you enjoy? Because then I have a general idea for the kind of stories that you like, and I'll more likely have some that might actually interest you rather than me just making guesses at random about your tastes. Now, since Game of Thrones is so popular, it's as good of a segue as any. I'd like to think that it is because of the few things that Game of Thrones offers that other shows do not. Things like a long-form narrative, deep characters, and world building that go far beyond what is possible to show in a single series, usually. And there just so happen to be some animated shows made by our good friends over in the land of the rising sun that have very similar qualities. So ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection, where today we are taking a look at anime to watch if Game of Thrones is leaving you feeling a bit... One of the greatest strengths, in this fan's opinion, of Game of Thrones is that, as a fantasy series, it likes to focus far more on the characters and how they are forced to interact and adapt to new situations, rather than just the spectacle of the fantasy itself. It also helps that our first suggestion is a bit more adult than what some people might expect out of animation if they've never really gone beyond Disney before, and what better way to introduce them into anime than to jump in the deep end with Berserk? Berserk's original anime, if you skip the initial episode, that has more to do with the original material. It is a fantasy war story that showcases what happens when you tell a character that they have a kind of divine right to rule, that it's their one purpose in life. And then, not only do they happen to be really good at leading people, but they also surround themselves with competent advisors to help them achieve their goals. Remind you of anyone? Well, the anime adaptation of Berserk's dark fantasy epic really only covers what could reasonably be considered the prologue of the story as a whole, the way that it showcases Griffith's rise to power. His aspirations to be king and his dance with madness is not something that many other stories do with the same level of growth and slow build-up over time. Plus, his relationships with the other main characters, Guts and Casca, feel a lot more grounded. They become true friends over the course of the show's run, which makes the end of this dark fantasy prologue all the more terrifying. There's also plenty of nudity, if that's something that improves the series for you. But because anime is made in Japan, there are several takes on fantasy that are also grounded in their own history. One of these takes is a series called Morabito. Morabito takes a type of feudal Japan and throws its own kind of fantasy twist onto it. It largely follows a skilled warrior named Balsa, who is charged with keeping alive the kingdom's young prince, now under attack from various sects from within the country, because they believe the prince to carry a demon inside of him, one that will bring ruin to the kingdom. But because this is a real fantasy, the demon inside the prince is not just a superstition. There's actually a legit spirit living inside of him, but what effects that this spirit will have on both the prince and the kingdom is less clear. Morabito's strengths are twofold. First, the relationship between Balsa and Prince Chagum is second to none in this category because really, there are very few characters like them in the first place. Balsa is a very strong-willed warrior who has the knowledge and the skills to outwit and defend against the realm's strongest assassins, while Chagum is a character that needs a fair amount of growth starting off, because he's a bit of a spoiled brat at the beginning, but he fleshes out into a wonderful young ruler. Their chemistry is what drives the show forward and what keeps us engaged for its entire 26-episode run. It also helps that the animation in the fight scenes specifically is damn good looking. But that's not actually what we're focusing on necessarily, so let's move on. So as far as looking at characters and how they can influence and make a great story on their own, the last series that I want to touch on is the Saga of Tania, the Evil. While you wouldn't describe this series as one with an ensemble of many strong characters, this is a series that is short and sweet about a character who is only one of those two things. While the explanation of Tania's backstory is a bit out there as a concept, the actual presentation of her as a commander in this fantastical war is played brilliantly. Tania is the epitome of a character that is almost too skilled for her own good, which makes her arrogant and vindictive, while also very vulnerable in the situations where she accidentally lands herself in over her head. While many times she comes off as a master tactician, she is also shown to fail when it makes sense to. She never wins because the plot demands it, nor does she fail because of some Deus Ex Machina junk at the final moment. It makes her feel far more real as a character because she is not perfect, just very skilled. So while her morals and actions are far from justifiable or reputable, you still find yourself rooting for this tiny psychopathic maniac all the same. Now, let's move away from characters specifically for a moment. Not that they don't have a role to play in the upcoming shows that I am about to mention, but I wanted to talk about the worlds themselves a bit more. One of my favorite things about the fantasy genre itself is when I am given the feeling that these worlds are distinctly different from our own, even if they take place in modern day, just a slightly fantastical version of it. And since we are relating most of these in some way to Game of Thrones, what do you think is better than having an epic story about 7 kingdoms? Why not 12 kingdoms? The 12 Kingdoms was originally a novel series by Fuyumi Ono, and those novels share a lot of similarities with George R.R. Martin's fantasy epic. Both contain massive worlds in scope that didn't necessarily follow the story of one specific hero throughout their journey to save a kingdom or the world. Instead, they both have several different character perspectives that all just happen to occur in the same universe. Though in the case of 12 Kingdoms, they're not all happening concurrently, and instead the perspectives are divided amongst the actual volumes. 12 Kingdoms starts off similarly to other story anime of the time, like Escaflowne. A young Japanese schoolgirl is whisked away into a fantasy world by a powerful spirit-like entity who claims that she is his queen. She then has to evolve through her experiences from this timid girl into a queen worthy of the kingdom she represents. But the reason I place 12 Kingdoms into the world-building category and not a character category is because the story of this young girl, Yuko, is not the only one. The narrative as a whole showcases multiple protagonists and multiple travelers from other worlds, all spanning generations of time. This is a world that is portrayed as very expansive to the point where much of the large 12 Kingdoms hasn't even been touched. Though while the light novel series is still ongoing, it's a disappointing comparison to Game of Thrones, as it also has been a while since we've gotten the last entry of it. But at least the anime does not decide to go off and finish the story on its own, to the disappointment of all. Another way that you can make your world expansive is to just have so gosh darn many side stories and entries into the franchise that it's hard to sometimes keep track of them all. Welcome to the world of Fate. Starting off as a visual novel in the early 2000s and getting its first anime adaptation in 2006, the Fate series is one that has expanded to massive scale, with multiple different offshoots and alternate universes. While I wouldn't say that all of these entries are worth your time or even good, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the franchise itself. And if you are coming into the franchise from Thrones, then the best place to start would be with Fate Zero. Written by Gen Urobuchi and endorsed by the franchise author Natsu himself, Zero is a prequel story to the original visual novel, and it is arguably the best written, and in the case of the anime, best produced adaptations in the whole franchise. It is a battle royale where mages of various skill levels summon heroic spirits from legends past to do battle for a mystical wish-granting MacGuffin, the Holy Grail. While Zero keeps much of the war and the consequences of it within the series itself, it's a perfect introduction for the Fate series as a whole that expands far beyond the confines of this one series into other anime, a mobile game, light novels, a mobile game, action-oriented battle games, and a mobile game. No, I don't have a problem. If you like Thrones, then Attack on Titan, while maybe an obvious choice, is definitely a series you should not sleep on. It is an incredibly gripping series about a fantasy society that has walled itself off from the rest of the world in fear of the massive titans that live outside. The titans who threaten to brutally murder and eat everyone alive. It is a story that places many seeds in the beginning that slowly grow over time as our group of young warriors are forced to train and grow while their society slowly retracts inward as the Titans breach the walls. The very walls that keep humanity safe. But it is not as simple of a story as just the good humans versus the bad Titans, and the actual conflicts stretch beyond that with much more serious consequences not only for the world, but for the relationships between all of our characters. We get to watch them venture out beyond the walls to find answers, while rich nobles sit pretty in the core of their society without worry or care that the rest of the citizens have to face. But unlike Thrones, Attack on Titan is not a series that hypes everything up for over 7 seasons only to give you an anticlimactic showdown at the end. At least I hope so, because the series is still technically ongoing, but it's been doing a very good job up until now. But really, the main similarity between these two fantasy shows is that they both present to us a semi-realistic world where the actions of humanity define the whole narrative. Where not all of the characters are virtuous, heroic, or stereotypically good, and what happens when those kinds of people are thrown together into situations that bring out the worst of them. And like Morabito, the action can keep you engaged even if the rest fails to keep you interested. Now lastly, if you want to watch an anime that exceeds the definition of epic storytelling, one that contains a massive ensemble of characters all with different compelling motivations and deep stories wrapped up in a narrative so expansive that it is also one of the most expensive anime out on shelves today for the sheer amount of rich content that it contains, then look no further than Legend of the Galactic Heroes. One of the major things missing from the majority of the shows that I've talked about today is political drama. This being one of Game of Thrones' bread and butter themes. And no anime, hell, very few pieces of entertainment handle that better than Legend of the Galactic Heroes. It is a series that extends out through 110 25-minute episodes and several films, but please, I beg of you, do not let the show's length scare you off. Especially considering that when you actually do the math, Legend of the Galactic Heroes clocks in at only about 46 hours compared to like Game of Thrones' 70 plus by the end of it, so really it's not all that long. And it uses that time extremely well to showcase this space opera that takes a young noble from poor beginnings to politically maneuvering his way into overthrowing an entire dynasty. Of course, the setting of the series is not limited to just one nation. The political intrigue and infighting spans the entire length of this space universe into one of the most fantastical series that has ever been animated, and it took them almost 10 years to do it. As such, I cannot stress how basically impossible it is to properly do this series justice in a video like this. Legend of the Galactic Heroes is a tale that takes a look at everything from every angle, every context, showing the consequences and ramifications to every decision as it pertains to lineage, military, politics, and religion. Not only that, but it's extremely hard to believe that a series of this length and magnitude was somehow able to retain its quality over time. However, through some miracle, it succeeds in every way. If you watch any anime that I mentioned today, this should be the one. While it might not be the easiest to sink your teeth into, it is by far the most robust and the most epic of any that I have listed. It is not, however, Game of Thrones the anime. Such a thing does not and probably will not exist unless HBO decides to animate a true ending, if Martin ever finishes one. But what I have hopefully laid before you today is a bunch of different options for other stories. Other grand tales full of rich worlds and deep characters that'll scratch that itch left by Thrones' epic narrative. So with luck, one of the anime that I have showcased will pique your interest, and I'll be putting links in the description for the shows that have legal streaming options available to them for those that require them. And so, thank you for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed, and a very special thank you to all of my patrons who not only support my work in general, but allow me to continue to do what I do. I love and appreciate you all. Specifically though, as I like to do, I want to give particular shoutouts to patrons Calhoun Boy, Matthew Robertson, Hector Montemayor, City Yamako, Ryfan Bonaparte, Rune Jacobson, and Joshua Garcia for being specially awesome. You guys are great. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.